Usually I have to ask for applause, so that was nice. Um, if you go to under View, if you could click full screen mode, that'll do the trick. Yeah, a little further down. Two more. There we go. Awesome. And they gave me a laser. This is going to be fun. I'm not going to tie you up too much with kind of high level setting the stage because I really want to pass the baton to Ruben. And despite the entry, this is not a scooter commercial presentation. This is about options for moving people around. I guess Jim's role was to steal my thunder from a couple of things that I was going to talk about with mobility as a service. But something that Gotcha, the company I work for, is essentially a multimodal company. So my background, I think it's helpful to just give you some context, is 20 years of transportation planning and urban planning. So multimodal corridor studies, traffic analysis, intelligent transportation system, like signal systems kind of stuff, all the stuff that planners and engineers deal with to try to help people move around in whatever mode they choose. And then over the years, I just happened to develop this extreme bias that we should have the freedom to be able to walk or ride a bike as fundamental modes of transportation. And then I've seen over the years how that fits so nicely into all the other options. So this is coming from a car owner. I want to, at my core, be able to walk to everything or choose if I need to drive, if I want to hop on a bus, if there's a shuttle, if there's, whatever the options are, I need to be able to have those options. So that's what Ruben and I are going to be talking about, is really giving people options, opening up access. Jim mentioned the gig economy and the sharing economy. I've heard it described also as the access economy. Mobility, it's been said, is like the #1 reason that people are held back from upward mobility in jobs, and that's across the spectrum of socioeconomics. It's people at the bottom end and it's people at the top end. The only thing keeping them from going just a bit further is access. So that's essentially what this is, that this idea that mobility is freedom, that gives you the option or the access to greater things. It doesn't have to be more expensive things, but just greater things that people would choose. Oops, I forgot, wrong key. There we go. These are just a few of the choices that Gotcha's been exploring: the low-speed electric vehicles, bicycles, e-bikes, and then the e-scooters. But this is all around the assumption that people will always need to be able to move around. It seems obvious, but with my background in transportation planning, there were so many times over the years where I'd be working on a project and we would get so focused on analysis of how buses should interact with cars, we would forget basic things like, what is it that a person's trying to do? What is their interest versus their stated position? So you'd hear these conflicts between engineers and planners at things like, well, I want more bike share, or I want to introduce a bike share program. And someone else would say, we don't want to introduce a bike share system because that's going to take up space on the sidewalks, and we need those sidewalks to put signal cabinets. So there's a nice way to keep in mind how to draw those two people groups together to solve human problems of mobility. I stole this story from a psychologist. I can't even remember their name. I wish I could credit them properly. But if you imagine a library, a public library, and two people sitting in this library near a window, they're both working quietly. One of them opens the window and then sits back down happily. There's this little breeze coming in. The other person looks over, walks over and shuts the window. Then there's that passive-aggressive Cold War. One opens the window, goes and sits down. The other closes the window. So after a couple of minutes, the librarian comes over, shaking her head at two grown men. What's going on? And one says, well, I want a fresh air, a nice fresh air. And the other one says, I don't want a breeze. It's messing up my papers. So she walks to the other side of the library and opens this wide window, and they're both happy. They get the fresh air, but there's no breeze. So that's their stated position is, I want the window up. I want the window down. But really, they have this shared interest of, I like fresh air. So it's the same kind of thing when we're doing transportation systems. We all have these interests of moving people around, But when we get caught up in the weeds, then we get into this stated position of, I want only the latest tech, or I want human-powered transportation. So keep that in mind. We're trying to solve essentially the same issue. We've got the same interests in mind. And so the way that's playing out now in transportation is, like Jim mentioned, this idea of mobility as a service where you don't anymore have to be burdened, I would say, by personal ownership of your own fleet of vehicles. It's not to outlaw vehicles, it's quite the opposite. It's to give you freedom to, rather than spending so much money buying and storing your own automobiles, to be able to access a library. I'm guessing from faces that I'm not the only Gen Xer in the room. So at some point, I don't know when this tipping point was, but I own hundreds of CDs and DVDs. It sounds silly to admit it now, but I still have them. And I knew when digital files started to be introduced, that's ridiculous. That's never going to take off. Music files on your computer, and people were talking about movies on your computer, because I knew you have to be able to hold every single one in your hand so that whenever you need that specific album, you could grab it and you could have it in your hand. And at some point in time, I flipped, and I didn't actually flip. I'm not that athletic, but that switch went, and I realized, you know what? It costs me a ton of money, and it's inconvenient to buy all this stuff and store all this stuff. I can, for a monthly fee, access this shared library, movies as a service, music as a service, and I might not be able to have the physical copy and smell the booklet, but I'm gonna be able to get essentially all, and then potentially way more than I would ever have had before. It's the same kind of shift that we're seeing in transportation. And the interesting cultural shift, I think, is we're not pushing against the trends by suggesting transportation, whether it's bicycles or access to buses and cars or any other type of transportation. We're not going against cultural norms. We're going with culture. It's just a different way of looking at how we move around. If you think about the way we're moving towards with groceries, I mean, it should be an eye-opener for urban planners when they see something like Amazon taking Whole Foods. This idea that they want to be able to, within an hour or two, get us all these different types of things, not just the widgets for our computers and all the dongles now that we have to buy for our Apple products, but also food and all these other things, clothing and boxes. I mean, all of these things it's getting easier and easier for us to just subscribe to these programs. Exact type of thing for mobility. I dwell on that because I think it's really important. I've found repeatedly, especially in the last year, we lose sight of that issue, that this is how culture is moving. So not only is it okay to dabble in this idea of mobility as a service, but it's crucial. There's so many business reasons why this is crucial to be part of this now, and not to just say, we're going to continue moving around the way we always have moved around. Whoops, did it again. And again, this is just visual representation of what you've already seen. This is just yet another brand of, I'm sure everyone here has used an Uber or Lyft. Perhaps you've used bike share before, but just this idea that in the very near future, with a single app or a web-based program, or through an employer, that's another way that we're going to be seeing increased access, to be able to simply say, for a monthly subscription, I'd like to access some time on the bicycle, or I need to use the bus, and you're using your mobile phone or your computer or a preset schedule with your employer, and you're getting access to all these ways of moving around, with the end goal in mind, that interest that we humans have got to move around and get to our normal stuff. So however advanced technology is getting around us, we still have these basic human needs of getting from place to place. So I'm gonna end there. There's so many other things I want to say, but I also want to hear Ruben talk, and you guys are gonna want to hear Ruben talk. So with that, if you could switch over to the Ruben presentation, that would be excellent. Thanks so much.
All right.